In the dusty, sun-baked town of Silver Creek, life was harsh and unforgiving, much like the land itself. The West, a land of opportunity, was also a land of danger. Outlaws, rustlers, and travelers who never stayed in one place too long were a common sight in these parts. The town had seen its fair share of excitement, but not much good came out of it. It was a place where secrets were buried deep beneath the earth, and even deeper within the hearts of those who lived there. Tom Red Walker and Jed Clark had arrived in Silver Creek on a whim. Both were men with rough pasts, full of stories that no one bothered to ask about. They wore the signs of hard living on their faces and the scars of past fights on their bodies. Tom, known for the bright red hair that gave him his nickname, and Jed, with his scruffy beard and quiet demeanor, looked like two men who had been born to ride the range and never look back. They had drifted into town with no particular plans other than to find some work, and that they did. They were hired by Jesse McAllister, the owner of a large ranch on the outskirts of Silver Creek. Jesse was a man of few words, but his presence was commanding, and the men quickly learned he wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Though the ranch was big, there wasn't much to it, just miles of land, cattle, and a few workers like Red and Jed who helped keep things running. It was the kind of job that kept a man busy, but it didn't pay much. Red and Jed were accustomed to living rough, but they found themselves liking the simplicity of ranch life. It was hard work and the days were long, but at least it kept them away from trouble. At least that was what they thought. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and cast long shadows over the plains, the two men were sent out to repair a fence on the edge of Jesse's property. It was a job that seemed simple enough, until they stumbled across something neither of them expected. As they worked, their shovels struck something hard beneath the ground. Curious, they dug further, thinking it might be an old rock or perhaps a piece of discarded farm equipment. But to their surprise, what they uncovered was far more valuable and dangerous than they could have imagined. The men found a hidden shaft long buried beneath the earth. It was covered by wooden planks, clearly old and weathered by time. The hole looked like it had been deliberately covered up, as if someone didn't want it to be found. Red's heart raced as he peered into the shaft. Inside they saw barrels, dozens of them stacked in neat rows, all buried beneath the ground. Jed's curiosity got the best of him, and he carefully pried one of the barrels open with a crowbar. Inside was something that made both men's hearts skip a beat. Gold. Not just a few coins or nuggets, but enough to make a person's eyes go wide. It was hidden treasure, something that had been lost to time, and it was sitting right there in front of them. For a moment, both men were speechless. The gold glimmered in the fading light, and for a second everything else seemed to fade away. It was tempting, far too tempting. Red felt a knot in his stomach. He knew this wasn't just any treasure. This was something more dangerous. They weren't supposed to find it. They weren't supposed to know about it. "This could be a fortune," Jed whispered, his voice low. But Red could already feel the weight of the secret pressing down on him. It wasn't just the gold that worried him, it was what it meant. Whoever had buried it there clearly didn't want it to be found. And that meant whoever owned the gold would do anything to keep it hidden. They didn't speak much after that. Instead, they covered the hole back up, careful to hide the evidence of what they had discovered. But even as they worked, Red couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a mistake. They had no right to this treasure. It didn't belong to them. Later that night, after a long day of work, Red and Jed sat around the campfire, the flickering flames casting shadows on their faces. The discovery of the gold weighed heavily on them, and neither could sleep. After a while, Jed spoke, his voice serious. "We've got to tell Jesse about it," he said, his eyes meeting Red's. Red looked at him, his brow furrowed. "You think that's a good idea?" he asked. "We don't know what kind of man Jesse really is." Jed didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared into the fire as if trying to find an answer in the flames. "He's the one who hired us," Jed finally said. "He deserves to know what we found. But we need to be careful. If he's hiding something, we need to know what it is." Red wasn't sure if Jed was right, but what they had found was too important to ignore. So the two men made up their minds. They would go to Jesse and tell him what they had uncovered. But they would do it cautiously. There was no telling how the rancher would react. That night, under a starry sky, Red and Jed made their way to Jesse's ranch house. It was a quiet, lonely place far from the hustle and bustle of town. The air was cool, and the ground beneath their boots was soft with dust. As they reached the front door, Red's heart raced. This was it. They were about to find out what kind of man Jesse McAllister really was. When Jesse answered the door, his expression was unreadable. He looked at the two men for a long moment before speaking. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Red cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "We found something," he said, his words slow and careful. "On the edge of the property, a mine shaft, and inside barrels full of gold." Jesse didn't blink. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "You've seen it," he said simply. Red and Jed exchanged a quick look. There was no surprise in Jesse's voice, no sign of alarm. It was as if he had been expecting this moment all along. That made Red uneasy. "Why didn't you tell us about it?" Red asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Jesse didn't immediately answer. He leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed. "Because it's not just gold," he said quietly. "It's part of something much bigger, and it's something I've been trying to forget." The rancher's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Red and Jed didn't understand it yet, but they would. What they had uncovered was far more than a treasure. It was a secret, one that would change their lives forever. And now that they knew it, they would be caught in a game much darker and more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The conversation between Red, Jed, and Jesse grew tense as the rancher stood silently, his arms crossed. He wasn't rushing to explain himself, and the two men could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Red's heart raced as he tried to figure out what was going on. The gold they had discovered was no ordinary treasure. It was something more, something that Jesse was clearly hiding. Jesse took a long breath and then spoke again, his voice steady but filled with an underlying weight that made Red uneasy. "I'm not going to pretend this is something simple. That gold didn't come from nowhere, and it sure didn't fall from the sky. It's connected to a past that I've spent years trying to bury." Red and Jed stood in the doorway, listening closely. The quiet of the night surrounded them, the only sound the distant rustling of the wind through the trees. This was the moment that would define everything. "The gold," Jesse continued, "belonged to a gang of outlaws who used to terrorize this land. Years ago, they were the ones who ran things in these parts. The leader was a man named Elijah Blackthorne, a ruthless bandit who didn't care who he hurt or what he destroyed. He and his gang hid the gold deep in the earth, far from anyone's reach, and left a trail of misery wherever they went." Red and Jed exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard stories of outlaws and treasure hidden in caves, but they never thought they would find themselves in the middle of one of those stories. The rancher's face was grim as he spoke, and the tension in the room grew thick. Years later, when Blackthorne and his gang were finally wiped out in a shootout with the law, no one knew where the gold was. It became a legend, a rumor passed around by the people who lived here, but no one ever thought to look for it, except for my father. He knew where it was, and he kept it hidden all these years, waiting for the right time. Jed's brow furrowed as he tried to piece everything together. "So that gold, it's yours now?" Jesse nodded slowly. "Yes, it's mine. But it's not just gold. It's a curse. My father made me promise that I would keep it buried, that I would never let anyone find it. He believed it was too dangerous, that the gold held a power of its own. And now that you two know about it, well, I don't have much choice but to deal with it." Red felt a chill run down his spine. He had never imagined that a simple discovery would lead to such a dangerous secret. But now it was clear. They had stumbled into something much bigger than they could handle. The rancher was right. The gold wasn't just a treasure, it was tied to a dark past, one that could have serious consequences for anyone who uncovered it. Before Red or Jed could say anything else, the sound of hooves broke the silence. Fast, sharp, and close. Jesse's face turned pale. Without a word, he grabbed both men by the arm and pulled them toward the barn. Red and Jed were confused, but Jesse's urgency left no room for questions. They followed him quickly, their boots thudding against the ground as they made their way through the dark. As they reached the barn, Jesse slammed the door shut behind them, locking it with a heavy wooden bolt. He motioned for them to keep quiet. They could hear the hooves growing louder outside, the sound of multiple riders coming fast. "Someone's after the gold," Jesse whispered urgently. "And they know you found it." Red's eyes widened. He had suspected that things were about to get complicated, but he hadn't realized just how dangerous it would be. Whoever was coming wasn't looking for a simple treasure hunt. They were after the entire secret that Jesse had been hiding. Jesse's hands were shaking as he quickly gathered supplies. "I didn't want this for you," he said to Red and Jed. "You've seen too much already. But now we have to get out of here before they get to us. The sound of hooves outside was growing louder, and the three men could feel the tension rising. Jesse didn't waste any time. He grabbed a couple of rifles from the barn and handed one to each of the outlaws. "Stay close to me," he said firmly. "We need to get to the back of the property. It's the only way out." With the rifles in hand, they made their way toward the back of the barn. Red could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This was no longer just about treasure or a secret. It was about survival. As they moved through the dark, the wind howling in their ears, they heard the riders approach, their voices growing louder. Jesse motioned for them to stop. "They'll be coming this way soon. We need to make it to the horses and get out of here." The men crouched low, the darkness providing some cover as they moved toward the barn's back exit. But the sound of horses was now so close that it felt as if the riders were just on the other side of the wall. There was no more time for thinking, only for action. With a swift motion, Jesse threw open the back door, revealing the horses tied up just outside. They were ready to go. Jesse's personal horses, swift and strong. Without a second thought, he mounted his horse and motioned for Red and Jed to follow suit. As they quickly climbed onto their horses, the riders outside finally burst into the barn, but it was too late. The trio was already galloping away fast as lightning into the dark night. The sounds of pursuit came quickly behind them. Red could hear the pounding hooves of their pursuers and the yells of men shouting orders. Jesse spurred his horse forward, urging the other two to ride faster. The moonlight shone down on the wide-open plains as they raced through the desert, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Don't look back," Jesse shouted over the noise of the wind and the galloping horses. "We need to lose them in the hills." The chase was on, and Red could feel the danger growing with every second. They rode through the dark, weaving between rocks and trees, doing everything they could to lose their pursuers. But every time they thought they had gained some ground, the sounds of horses and shouting grew louder. They were being hunted. Finally, as they reached the edge of the hills, Jesse led them into a narrow pass, the rocky walls on either side creating a natural barrier that would make it harder for the riders to follow. The three of them urged their horses onward, their breathing labored but determined. They couldn't stop now. As the hours passed, the pursuit seemed to slow, and Red felt a small sense of hope. Maybe they had lost the riders. But they couldn't stop, not yet. They had to keep moving. The gold, the secret, the danger, they were all still out there, and Jesse knew that it wasn't over. By dawn, they had made it to a small hidden cave in the mountains, a place Jesse knew well. It was their temporary refuge, a place where they could regroup and plan their next move. Red and Jed dismounted, their legs aching from the long ride. Jesse stood by his horse, looking out over the horizon. "We can't stay here long," he said, his voice firm. "They'll come looking for us. But for now, we're safe, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect you both. You've seen what I've been hiding, and now it's too late to turn back." Red and Jed looked at each other, realizing the gravity of the situation. They were in this together now. Whatever happened next, they would face it side by side. The secret they had uncovered had changed everything. It wasn't just about treasure anymore. It was about survival and the consequences of knowing too much.